Colonel Nathaniel Wolfe. Tall, stone-faced, the kind of man whose boots made sounds on tile floors. He stepped through the doors just before dawn, surveyed the room like a battlefield. His uniform was dusted with frost. His presence was quiet but commanding. "You're Linda Kingston?" he asked. She nodded, drying her hands on her apron. "That's me." He held her gaze. "This place, it's saving lives." She didn't flinch. "It's what my father would have done." Colonel Wolfe looked around, at the families curled in booths, soldiers sleeping under army blankets, Jake handing out soup like it was gold. Then, without ceremony, he reached into his coat and pulled out a government-issued envelope. It was thick, stuffed with crisp bills. "For services rendered," he said, extending it to her. Linda didn't move. "I'm not taking your money." He blinked. "It's not charity." "No," she said, firmer now. "It's duty. Just like it is for you." Wolfe studied her. Then withdrew the envelope slowly, sliding it back into his coat. "All right," he said. "What if we make a deal?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Let the army use this place as a temporary depot. We'll bring in real beds, medics, fuel, food. In return, we'll fix the roof, reinforce insulation, and make sure no one here freezes before this storm breaks." Linda looked around. The cracked windows. The generators sputter. The sagging roof leaking in snow melt. The line of strangers sleeping safe. Then she looked back at him and extended her hand. "Deal." And in that moment, everything changed. The storm came in fast. Not like a gentle snowfall or the kind of winter squall locals in this part of the country were used to. No, this one howled down the mountains like a living thing, ice-cold, furious, and relentless. By the time state police issued road closures, it was already too late for many. Highways turned to parking lots. Rigs jackknifed. Black ice swallowed tires. And up along Route 29, where the trees lean like old men in the wind, a lonely roadside diner called Kingston Stop stood as the last light on a road that vanished into white. Inside, Linda Kingston was scrubbing the same spot on the countertop for the third time, her eyes not really seeing the rag or the formica. She was watching the snow thicken outside like it was trying to bury the world. "Power's flickering again," Jake Morrow muttered, coming in from the back, stomping snow off his boots. He was ex-military, quiet, reliable. Worked part-time fixing rigs and handling the odds and ends at the diner. Ever since her father passed, he'd stepped in like a silent promise to help. Never said it aloud, just did. Linda nodded without looking. "We've got maybe an hour before the lines freeze up completely." And just like that, click, the power went out. The silence was immediate and total. The humming refrigerator, the buzzing fluorescent light, the ancient radio in the corner playing 60s country, all silenced. She looked at Jake. That hour just got cut in half. He was already moving. "I'll fire up the generator." By 6 p.m., the snow was up past the diner's windows. Visibility? Maybe 2 feet. Nothing moved out there except for wind, spinning powder like it was throwing tantrums. Linda had lit up a few kerosene lamps, the kind her father always insisted on keeping around, in case the world decides to forget how to work. She'd laughed at him for that. Not tonight. Then came the pounding at the door. Jake was the first to move, stepping cautiously, hand on the wrench tucked into his belt. But Linda was faster. She swung the door open into a face full of snow and wind, and then a figure stumbled in, bundled in a thick military coat, followed by another and another. "We're sorry," one said, pulling off his goggles. "Convoy got stranded a few miles down. Fuel froze. We've got wounded. We need shelter." Linda blinked at him, then stepped aside. "Bring them in." No hesitation. No questions. Just instinct. Within minutes the place was filled. Soldiers, bundled tight, shaking from cold and fatigue. A few truckers had hitched rides with them, their own rigs buried under snow. One young soldier was limping, arm bloodied and wrapped with a makeshift tourniquet. Another collapsed the moment he hit warmth. Jake guided them to the booths and booths turned into stretchers. The vinyl seats were hard but they were dry and warm. Linda moved fast, boiled what water she could, poured broth into cracked mugs, and handed out the last of her biscuits without blinking. There was no time to think. Only do. An hour passed. Then another. Word spread fast. By midnight, Kingston Stop had turned into something else entirely, a lifeboat in a drowning world. Truckers from the interstate began to trickle in, faces red from wind, boots crusted in ice. A mother with 2 children. A grizzled man with a dog wrapped in a scarf. No one was turned away. Jake set up folding cots in the back. Linda kept the kitchen going. No electricity, no running water. Just gas burners and grit. That's when he arrived. Colonel Nathaniel Wolfe. Tall. Stone-faced. The kind of man whose boots made sounds on tile floors. He stepped through the doors just before dawn, surveyed the room like a battlefield. His uniform was dusted with frost. His presence was quiet but commanding. "You're Linda Kingston?" he asked. She nodded, drying her hands on her apron. "That's me." He held her gaze. "This place, it's saving lives." She didn't flinch. "It's what my father would have done." Colonel Wolfe looked around, at the families curled in booths, soldiers sleeping under army blankets, Jake handing out soup like it was gold. Then, without ceremony, he reached into his coat and pulled out a government-issued envelope. It was thick, stuffed with crisp bills. "For services rendered," he said, extending it to her. Linda didn't move. "I'm not taking your money." He blinked. "It's not charity." "No," she said, firmer now. "It's duty. Just like it is for you." Wolfe studied her. Then withdrew the envelope slowly, sliding it back into his coat. "All right," he said. "What if we make a deal?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. Let the army use this place as a temporary depot. We'll bring in real beds. Medics. Fuel. Food. In return, we'll fix the roof, reinforce insulation, and make sure no one here freezes before this storm breaks." Linda looked around. The cracked windows. The generators sputter. The sagging roof leaking in snow melt. The line of strangers sleeping safe. Then she looked back at him and extended her hand. "Deal." And in that moment, everything changed. Not just the temperature. Not just the supplies. The spirit of the place shifted, like the diner remembered what it had been built for. A legacy. A refuge. A promise. By sunrise, the storm had swallowed the roads whole. Plows were frozen in place. Emergency crews were immobilized. Whole towns went dark, powerless, isolated, unreachable. But there was one place where the lights, even if dim and flickering, never went out. Kingston's Stop. It didn't look like much from the outside, a squat roadside diner half buried in snow, its neon sign cracked and barely glowing. But inside it pulsed with life. Within 12 hours of Colonel Wolfe's arrival, the transformation began. The army moved fast. By mid-morning, 2 snowcats carved a path from the stalled convoy to the diner, hauling crates of MREs, medical kits, fuel cans, and portable heaters. Engineers in thick gloves worked non-stop, sealing windows with foam and plastic sheeting, rigging solar blankets against the wind-exposed walls, reinforcing the aging roof with struts they cut right there in the snow. They weren't just fixing a building, they were fortifying a lifeline. Linda Kingston, still in her flour-dusted apron, became the beating heart of it all. She never stopped moving. Pouring coffee for frostbitten hands. Reassuring a worried mother whose son hadn't made it through the storm yet. Heating soup with the same focus a surgeon might give a patient on the table. Jake Morrow set up a triage space near the back booths. His military training came back like muscle memory. He organized medics, labeled supplies, turned an old jukebox into a shelving unit for bandages and antibiotics. Soldiers trusted him instantly. They called him Doc, even though he never claimed the title. It wasn't just soldiers and truckers now. Civilians found their way there. Some walked miles in blinding snow after their cars stalled. Others were found and brought in by army patrols who extended their reach as the storm worsened. A woman in her 70s who'd been stuck in her trailer with no heat. A man who'd tried to carry his diabetic brother to town on foot. 3 teenagers who'd been on a ski trip and got lost in the backroads. They all ended up at Kingston Stop. The colonel set up a mobile command post in the diner's back storage room. Maps taped to freezer doors. Radios squawking between bites of thawed apple pie. He didn't sleep. Neither did most of his team. Yet in the middle of all this, the chaos, the cold, the crush of needs, something else began to grow. Not fear. Not despair. But community. People started helping people. Truckers shoveled snow off the roof without being asked. Soldiers handed out hot cocoa to frighten kids like they were at a school fair. A group of stranded college students created a watch schedule so the elderly could sleep uninterrupted. And Linda, she kept the center together with nothing more than warmth and steel. She didn't command like the colonel. She didn't strategize like the engineers. But her presence, calm, practical, maternal, gave the place its soul. "Linda," one exhausted private asked halfway through scrubbing dishes, "do you ever sit down?" She chuckled and shook her head. "You sit when the job's done." Job ain't done. It was on the second night that things came to a head. A soldier named Ramirez collapsed while helping lift propane tanks. His face was pale, lips blue. "Hypothermia," Jake said, voice low. He pushed too hard. They got him stable, but the mood shifted. People started murmuring. Some of the civilians were scared. A woman whispered that they should try to walk to the next town, that it was too dangerous to stay. The fear was spreading fast. Colonel Wolfe knew it. He rose from his makeshift desk and walked out to the main floor, eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. "Everyone," he said. "Listen to me." Voices dropped. Utensils stopped clinking. Even the children seemed to hush. "I've served in deserts and mountains. I've seen what happens when panic replaces purpose. And I'm telling you now, this is not that place. This," he gestured around, "is the safest structure for 30 miles. Not because of walls or heaters. Because of people." He turned to Linda, who stood behind the counter, hands resting on a coffee pot. This woman didn't wait for clearance. She opened her doors and saved lives. To Jake. This man rebuilt half this place on a generator and a tool belt. And finally to the crowd. You don't survive a storm like this by running. You survive it by standing together. Silence. Then applause. Slow. Growing. Real. Linda blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected recognition. Certainly not from a colonel. But there it was, gratitude from soldiers, from truckers, from frightened mothers and young kids. Colonel Wolfe didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened. He nodded once and stepped back. Later that night, as Jake rechecked fuel levels outside and the wind howled like wolves in the trees, Linda stood by the diner window watching the snow. Colonel Wolfe approached quietly. "How are you holding up?" She didn't turn. "Truth? I'm exhausted. But I don't have time to be anything else." He was silent for a moment. "I requested a satellite uplink. If we're lucky, we'll have contact with the main base by morning. Once we do, we'll start evacuations. Airlift for the worst cases. Convoys once the roads are clear." Linda finally looked at him. "And this place?" He nodded toward the sleeping forms on booths and cots. "This place stays warm. Until the last person is safe." She studied him. "You could have stayed in the command vehicle. You didn't have to come in here." "I did," he said simply. "Some battles are fought in mud. Others in kitchens." And for the first time she smiled. A real one. Not because the storm was over, it wasn't. Not because help had arrived, it hadn't yet. But because, in this fragile corner of the world, something stronger than frost had taken root. Human decency. By the third day the storm stopped roaring. But it didn't go quietly. It left behind a silence so thick, it pressed against the windows like an invisible weight. A silence broken only by the soft hum of portable heaters, the occasional murmur of voices, and the ever-present creak of a building holding back nature's worst. Linda Kingston moved slower now. Not because she was tired, though she was, but because every step felt heavier. Like the storm hadn't just dumped snow outside, but sorrow inside too. 2 more people had collapsed the night before. One was Ramirez again. The other, a young woman with asthma whose inhaler had run out. Jake had stayed with her through the night, using improvised steam treatments, keeping her upright while she gasped for every breath. Linda had watched him, quietly, remembering the man who once couldn't hold a steady job, now anchoring a room full of people's hope. And Colonel Wolfe, he hadn't left the building in 36 hours. His voice remained calm, but his eyes were dark with fatigue. Behind the scenes, he'd been working to coordinate a final push. An airlift. A way out. But something went wrong. The storm had knocked out more than local power. It damaged a key satellite relay. The base hadn't been able to reach them. The rescue that was supposed to arrive that morning never came. Tension began to rise again. A baby had run a fever all night. They were nearly out of fuel for the backup generators. And the temperature had dropped again. Jake ran to Linda at sunrise. "We need to get that baby on oxygen. Her skin's going blue." Linda didn't hesitate. She called for volunteers. Within minutes, the baby's father, 2 soldiers, and Jake were wrapping her in layers, placing her on a makeshift stretcher. But the oxygen tanks were outside, in the buried ambulance at the edge of the lot. 30 yards. Through waist-high snow. Sub-zero wind. 30 yards that felt like a mile. Linda gripped Jake's hand before he left. "Don't stop for anything. Don't argue. Just bring her back breathing." Jake gave a nod, but Colonel Wolfe stopped him before the door. "I'm going." Jake hesitated. "Sir, you haven't slept in?" "I'm going," the colonel repeated, pulling his scarf up tight. "There's no protocol for this. Just people." They disappeared into the white. The seconds dragged. Then minutes. Inside, everyone stood still. Some prayed. Some held each other. Some just stared at the frosted glass, waiting for shadows. Then, movement. First 1 figure. Then 3. Jake, the colonel, the father, and the tiny bundled child between them. They burst through the door, gasping, clothes soaked, fingers raw. "But the baby," she cried. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. A broken, wailing little cry that brought tears to half the diner. Linda took her without a word and rushed her to warmth. The people cheered, clapped, hugged each other. The moment felt like a victory, and it was. But it came at a cost. Colonel Wolfe collapsed by the window. Not dramatically. Not like a soldier struck by a bullet. Quietly. Silently. Jake rushed to him. His pulse was faint. His skin ice cold. "Damn frostbite," Jake muttered, ripping off gloves and working fast. "Lungs are stressed. He should be gone out there." Linda stood nearby, frozen in place. The colonel had never complained. Never asked for comfort. He had simply led. Until his body couldn't carry one more soul through that storm. It took an hour to stabilize him. An hour where the heat flickered again. An hour where everyone feared the worst. But then, a sound broke through. Not a baby's cry. A rotor blade. Oh, thunderous. Unmistakable. A Black Hawk helicopter. Jake ran outside, waving a tattered orange vest. Soldiers stumbled out behind him, yelling. Civilians huddled at the windows, stunned. The cavalry had arrived. What followed was a blur. Emergency crews in orange and green came pouring into the diner. Medics. Engineers. Relief workers. Hugs. Handshakes. Tears. Linda watched them all like a dream. She didn't cry. She just exhaled. Like she'd been holding her breath since the storm began. The colonel was airlifted out with the first wave. Still unconscious. Wrapped in every spare blanket they could find. As the chopper lifted off, Linda pressed her hand to the glass, watching him go. She wasn't sure he'd live. But she knew he'd saved everyone else. 2 weeks passed. The storm made national news. Kingston's stop was dubbed the Miracle Diner. Survivors gave interviews. Soldiers wrote letters home. Jake, finally recognized, was offered a civilian medal for heroism. But Linda refused the limelight. She returned to her counter, coffee pot in hand, smile in place. Business boomed, of course. People drove from neighboring towns just to sit in the booth where Colonel Wolfe passed out saving a baby. A senator called. A news crew visited. But the diner remained, itself, simple, steady, honest. One morning the door opened, and in stepped Colonel Nathaniel Wolfe. Thinner, still pale, but upright. Linda looked up. Her hand trembled on the coffee pot. Jake stood so fast he knocked over a salt shaker. "Hey Doc," the colonel rasped. "Save a seat for me?" Linda came from behind the counter and hugged him. A long, quiet, shaking hug that said everything no uniform or medal ever could. "You stupid, stubborn man," she whispered. "You didn't have to go out there." "I did," he replied, his voice hoarse. "That baby cried. That means I made the right call. He looked around the diner. I've commanded battalions. I've seen combat on 3 continents. But I've never seen anything as powerful as what happened here. Jake stepped forward. You mean the storm? The colonel shook his head. No. The people. The trucker who gave his coat to a stranger. The waitress who fed everyone before eating herself. The mechanic who became a medic. And the woman who ran it all like a general, in an apron. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. For you, he said, handing it to Linda. She opened it. Inside was a small Army Challenge coin, gold rim, eagle crest engraved with a date. The day the storm hit. What's this for? She asked softly. Colonel Wolfe straightened. For valor. For leadership. For holding the line when no one else could. Linda blinked fast. I didn't do anything special. You did everything right, he said. Then he sat down at the counter and tapped his coffee cup. And now, I'd really like a piece of that peach pie. Linda smiled. And for the first time since the storm, the diner was quiet, not from fear but from peace.